The master's wife wanted a perfect match. Her sister wanted the slave. They say love does not care about walls, rules, or the color of a man's skin. But in the summer of 1858, on a wide cotton plantation in the deep South, love was the most dangerous thing a heart could hold. One young woman was promised a perfect future. One young man was never meant to dream at all. And one master's wife believed she could arrange everyone's life like pieces on a chessboard. But hearts are not pieces. They beat, they choose, and sometimes they rebel. This story takes us to a quiet plantation called Willow Creek. The fields stretch far, the house stands tall, and secrets move softly through its halls. At the center of it all is a young enslaved man with kind eyes, a master's proud wife who believes she knows what is best, and her younger sister who begins to question everything she was taught. What starts as a simple plan for marriage slowly turns into a storm of feelings no one can control. If you enjoy stories full of love, secrets, and shocking twists, make sure you follow and stay with me until the end. The year was 1858. Willow Creek Plantation rested under the heavy southern sun. The land belonged to Thomas Whitmore, but inside the grand white house, it was his wife, Margaret Whitmore, who truly ruled. Margaret was known for her grace and her strong will. She believed everything had its proper place, the silver polished, the curtains pressed, the servants obedient, and her younger sister properly married. Her sister, Eleanor Hayes, had come to stay for the summer. Eleanor was 20, soft-spoken, and curious about the world beyond fine dresses and polite dinners. She noticed things others ignored. In the fields worked Samuel, a young black man with steady hands and quiet strength. Though bound by chains of ownership, his spirit remained thoughtful and calm. He spoke little, but when he did, his voice carried warmth. Margaret had already chosen a future for Eleanor. She planned for her to marry her husband's brother, Charles Whitmore, a wealthy man from a nearby town. It was, in Margaret's mind, a perfect match. But Eleanor's heart had begun to wander somewhere Margaret would never expect, and Samuel had begun to notice her watching him. The days at Willow Creek moved slowly, but something new had begun to stir beneath the calm surface. Eleanor tried to follow her sister's plans. Every afternoon, Margaret would sit with her in the front parlor, speaking of lace gloves, dinner parties, and the bright future waiting with Charles Whitmore. Charles had started visiting more often. He was polite, well-dressed, and proud of his growing business in town. He spoke of expanding land and building a larger home. He spoke as if life were something to purchase. Eleanor listened, nodded, and smiled when required. But her heart felt distant during those talks. What she remembered most each day was the sound of Samuel's voice. It started with something small. One warm morning, Eleanor wandered farther than she usually did. She carried a book but found herself distracted by the wide cotton fields. She had never really looked at them before. Not closely. Samuel was repairing a broken fence near the edge of the property. His sleeves were rolled, his movements steady and careful. When he noticed Eleanor standing nearby, he stepped back respectfully. "Miss Eleanor," he said gently, lowering his eyes. "You may look at me," she replied without thinking. He hesitated, then slowly lifted his gaze. There was no anger there. No bitterness, only quiet caution. "I did not mean to disturb your work," she said softly. "You are not disturbing anything, ma'am." There was a silence between them. Not awkward, just unsure. Eleanor glanced at the fence. "You fixed that alone?" "Yes, ma'am." It looked stronger than before. A small smile touched Samuel's face. "Thank you." It was a simple exchange. Only a few words. But something shifted. From that day on, Eleanor found small reasons to walk near the edge of the fields. Sometimes she brought water. Sometimes she asked harmless questions about the crops. She told herself she was only curious. Samuel remained careful. He answered respectfully, never stepping too close, never speaking out of turn. But slowly, the spaces between their words began to fill with meaning. One evening, the sky burned orange as the sun lowered. Eleanor found Samuel sitting alone near the barn, carving a small piece of wood with careful hands. "What are you making?" she asked quietly. He stood quickly. "Just something to pass the time." She stepped closer, ignoring the distance he tried to keep. In his hands was a small wooden bird, wings half spread. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It is meant to fly," he said softly, "even if it is carved from something that cannot move." Their eyes met. Eleanor felt her chest tighten. "Do you wish to fly?" she asked before she could stop herself. Samuel paused. The question was dangerous, but he answered honestly. "Everyone does, Miss Eleanor." That night, Eleanor could not sleep. Meanwhile, Margaret noticed changes. Eleanor seemed distracted at dinner. She asked fewer questions about wedding fabrics. She excused herself earlier in the evenings. Margaret decided it was time to move plans forward. One afternoon, she called Eleanor into her sitting room. "Charles has formally asked for your hand," Margaret said with calm satisfaction. "He will make you comfortable. Safe. You should feel honored." Eleanor's hands tightened in her lap. "Must I answer now?" Margaret frowned slightly. "There is nothing to think about. This is a blessing." Eleanor lowered her eyes. "I do not love him." Margaret's expression hardened. "Love grows. Security matters more." Eleanor gathered courage she did not know she had. "And if my heart chooses differently?" Margaret gave a sharp, almost amused smile. "Your heart does not choose. Your family does." The words felt like a door closing. Later that same week, Margaret witnessed something she had not expected. From the balcony, she saw Eleanor near the far oak tree, speaking with Samuel. They were not touching. They were not standing improperly close. But the look in Eleanor's eyes was not one of a curious lady. It was something deeper. Margaret's fingers tightened around the railing. That evening, she summoned Samuel to the main house under the excuse of discussing stable repairs. He entered through the side door, hat in hand. Margaret studied him carefully. "You have been spending time near my sister." "I only answer when she speaks, ma'am." "You would be wise to remember your place." His voice remained calm. "Yes, ma'am." Margaret stepped closer, lowering her voice. "My sister is to be married soon. You will not fill her head with foolish dreams." Samuel swallowed. "I have done nothing wrong." Margaret's gaze sharpened. Sometimes simply existing in the wrong space is wrong enough. The message was clear. When Samuel left the house, he felt the weight of something heavy pressing on his chest. The next day, he kept his distance. When Eleanor approached, he stepped away. "Have I offended you?" she asked, hurt in her voice. "No, Miss Eleanor." "Then why do you avoid me?" He looked at her carefully, knowing every word mattered. "Because some paths only lead to pain." Her eyes filled with quiet tears. "And what if I do not fear pain?" "I fear it for you," he replied. From the porch, Margaret watched again. And this time, she knew. Her perfect plan was slipping, and she would not allow a slave to destroy it. The air at Willow Creek no longer felt calm. A storm was coming. The summer had grown hotter, and tension at Willow Creek was as heavy as the sun beating down on the cotton fields. What had been quiet glances and careful conversations between Eleanor and Samuel was now impossible to hide. Margaret could see it in every fleeting look, every hesitant smile. Her carefully planned future for Eleanor with Charles Whitmore was unraveling. One evening, Charles arrived earlier than expected. Eleanor had been walking near the far fields, hoping to catch a glimpse of Samuel, but she had barely reached the edge when she saw him approaching. Her heart raced, not from fear, but from longing. Samuel bowed his head politely, yet the faintest spark of recognition flickered in his eyes. "Miss Eleanor," he murmured. "Samuel," she breathed, stepping closer. Before they could speak further, Charles appeared behind her, his boots crunching on the dirt. "Eleanor," he said warmly, but there was a tension in his tone, a sharpness Eleanor had never heard before. Margaret says we have much to discuss about the wedding plans. Samuel's hand clenched slightly at his side, and Eleanor felt a pang of panic. The world suddenly seemed too small, the fields too vast. Charles. She started, but he raised his hand. Do not speak, he said firmly. That night, back in the parlor, Margaret spoke with an intensity Eleanor had never seen. This cannot continue, she said. You have no right to distract my sister, Samuel. If you care for her, you will leave her alone. Samuel met her gaze calmly. Ma'am, I care for no one but myself. But I cannot ignore her heart. Margaret's face went pale with anger. Your heart does not matter. You are a servant. You are property. And yet, you presume to speak as though your feelings can dictate her life? I speak for her happiness, Samuel said quietly. Not mine. Eleanor stepped forward, her voice trembling. Margaret, I cannot marry Charles. I cannot pretend my heart does not belong where it does. Margaret's eyes narrowed. Do you defy me, Eleanor? I do, Eleanor said, finally. The words felt like fire escaping from a long-buried place inside her. I love Samuel. The room fell silent. Even Charles froze, staring at Eleanor as though he could not believe what he had heard. Samuel remained calm but tense, as if bracing for a storm he could neither predict nor control. You will not make this choice, Margaret finally shouted, her voice breaking with desperation. You will obey your family, and you will marry Charles. No, Eleanor whispered, her voice gaining strength. I will not. Margaret's hand shook as she turned away, unable to contain her frustration. Outside, the night was still, but the air felt charged with electricity. The next morning, Samuel received a warning from one of the older enslaved men. Miss Eleanor's sister does not forgive, the man said. Keep your distance or the master will hear. Samuel's heart pounded. He knew Margaret would do whatever she could to protect her plans, even if it meant separating him from Eleanor forever. That evening, Eleanor found Samuel in the barn. She ran to him, ignoring the danger. I cannot stay silent any longer, she said. I will not let anyone decide my heart but me. Samuel hesitated. Eleanor, if we are seen, if your sister discovers. I do not care, she said, tears welling in her eyes. I would rather risk everything than live without this truth. For a long moment, they stood there, the barn warm with the summer heat, the smell of hay and earth surrounding them. Then, slowly, carefully, Samuel took her hand. It was a dangerous gesture, but neither could pull away. Suddenly, the door creaked. Margaret stood there, her face pale and eyes wide with fury. This is enough, she screamed. You will obey me, Eleanor. You hear me? I hear you, Eleanor said softly. But my heart will not obey you. Margaret stepped forward, trembling with rage. You will destroy everything I have planned. I will follow what is right for me, Eleanor said firmly, squeezing Samuel's hand. The moment was electric. Charles appeared behind Margaret, his expression unreadable. He had overheard part of the exchange. For a man used to having control, this was new, unsettling. I will not force her, Charles said finally, almost reluctantly. But you are making a dangerous choice, Eleanor. I am choosing love, Eleanor whispered. Even if it frightens you all. Margaret's lips pressed together. She turned and left the barn without another word, slamming the door behind her. Outside, the summer wind carried the echoes of that slam across the fields. Eleanor and Samuel stood together, holding hands tightly. They knew the road ahead would be difficult. Margaret would not forgive so easily. Charles would not forget. The plantation itself seemed to watch them, knowing that its carefully maintained order had been shaken. And yet, despite the danger, despite the uncertainty, Eleanor felt a lightness she had never known. For the first time, she had chosen her own path. For the first time, she had followed her heart. It was the moment when nothing could remain the same. The storm had arrived. The days after that stormy evening were tense and uncertain at Willow Creek. The plantation seemed quieter somehow, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Margaret moved through the house with an icy precision, her smile polite but her eyes sharp, watching Eleanor at every turn. Eleanor, meanwhile, felt a mixture of relief and fear. Choosing Samuel had freed her heart, but she knew it had tied her to danger. Every step she took, every glance she gave him, felt like stepping along the edge of a cliff. And yet, she could not stop herself. Samuel kept his distance in the open, careful not to break the rules outright. But they found quiet moments when the house and the fields were empty, when no one else could watch. Sometimes it was a glance, sometimes a word, sometimes a touch of hands as brief as the wind. Each moment was precious, each one a rebellion. Margaret knew that she could not simply ignore the growing bond. One evening, she called Eleanor to her room again. The soft glow of a candle lit the walls, casting shadows across the furniture. Margaret's voice was quieter now, but still firm. "You have made your choice," she said, "and I cannot change your heart. But know this path will be hard. You will face judgment. You will face danger. Samuel is not free. You may both suffer for this." Eleanor's chin lifted. "I know," she said, "but I cannot live in fear. Not when I feel this way." Margaret sighed, leaning back. "Then be prepared. You must move carefully. You cannot let Charles or your family see this bond openly. And you cannot allow anyone else to manipulate you into regret." Eleanor nodded. The weight of Margaret's words was heavy, but there was also a strange relief in her acknowledgement. Outside, Samuel and Eleanor found moments in the fields before dawn, when the world was quiet and the light just beginning to creep over the horizon. Samuel showed her a small grove near the creek, where the trees formed a natural shelter. "Here," he whispered, "no one can see us." Eleanor smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "It feels like a secret world," she said. "One that is ours alone." "It is," Samuel agreed softly. "But even here, we must remember the dangers. If we are discovered, we could be torn apart." Eleanor nodded. The risk made her heart beat faster, but it also made her feel alive. They talked for hours that morning, sharing dreams they had never spoken aloud. Eleanor told Samuel about her childhood, about the books she had loved, about a longing for freedom she had never allowed herself to name. Samuel spoke of his family, of memories of his parents, and of small hopes he carried even in the shadow of slavery. Meanwhile, Margaret observed the growing closeness between them from afar. She was angry, yes, but she also realized something she had never admitted. Eleanor's happiness mattered more than her plans. Still, she knew she could not let events unfold without guidance. She approached Charles with caution. "You must understand," she said one evening, "that Eleanor has made a choice that is not mine to change. You must be patient and accept it." Charles, though frustrated, understood the truth in her words. He was a man accustomed to getting what he wanted, but Eleanor's decision had cut through the certainty of his life. For the first time, he felt powerless. As the tension in the house slowly began to settle, Eleanor and Samuel found a rhythm. Their stolen moments became more frequent, though still careful. Each glance, each touch, each whispered word strengthened the bond that neither could deny. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Eleanor and Samuel sat together in the grove. The air was warm, the river nearby murmuring softly. Eleanor leaned her head on Samuel's shoulder. "I never thought love could feel like this," she whispered. Samuel held her close. "Neither did I," he said. "But it is real, and that makes it worth the risk." For the first time, Eleanor felt the full weight of choice, the responsibility of choosing love against the rules, against expectation, against fear. And for the first time, she felt the joy of freedom, even if it was only a small freedom in the shadow of Willow Creek. Margaret, though watching from a distance, felt the change in the air. She could not stop what had begun, but she also knew that careful guidance, patience, and understanding would be necessary if any peace was to be preserved. The storm had passed, but the world had changed. And as the sun disappeared behind the horizon, Eleanor and Samuel held each other tightly, knowing that the future was uncertain, but for the first time, it belonged to them both. The summer slowly gave way to autumn, and Willow Creek seemed to breathe a little easier. The tension that had filled the house for months softened into a cautious peace. Eleanor and Samuel had grown stronger together, their bond tempered by secrecy, courage, and mutual respect. They no longer had to rush their conversations or hide stolen glances in the shadows. Their careful planning allowed moments that felt like small victories. Eleanor had learned to navigate the plantation with subtlety, speaking to Samuel in quiet corners and finding ways to communicate without drawing attention. The other enslaved workers had quietly supported them, offering small protections and distractions, ensuring that nothing overt would reach Margaret or Charles. In this way, the couple's love became a hidden force that could not be ignored. Margaret watched carefully, her pride bruised but tempered by love for her sister. Though she had resisted at first, she could not deny the joy that radiated from Eleanor when she was with Samuel. Slowly, Margaret came to understand that controlling Eleanor's life was not as important as her happiness. Charles Whitmore, for his part, withdrew gracefully, though with a quiet disappointment. He visited the plantation less frequently, acknowledging Eleanor's choice. Though the man had been used to power and control, he realized that he could not force the heart to bend. In time, his visits stopped altogether, leaving the house free of unnecessary tension. With the cooler air of autumn came a sense of clarity. Samuel and Eleanor began to openly speak about their future in quiet ways, sharing dreams of a life beyond the fields. Samuel longed for freedom, not just from the constraints of the plantation, but from the fear that had long shadowed his days. Eleanor promised to stand by him, to support him, and to seek a life where their love could thrive without hidden corners or whispers. One crisp morning, Eleanor and Samuel stood at the edge of the cotton fields, where the sun filtered through the trees in golden rays. Samuel held Eleanor's hands in his grip steady and full of reassurance. "We have come far," he said quietly. "Yes," Eleanor replied. "Farther than I ever imagined I could go. And yet, it feels like the beginning." Margaret approached them that day, her steps measured and deliberate. She stopped a few paces away, watching her sister with a mixture of relief and caution. "Eleanor," she said softly, "I see now that your happiness lies with Samuel. I cannot control the heart. I only ask, be careful and be wise." Eleanor smiled, feeling the warmth of forgiveness and understanding. "I will," she promised. Samuel bowed his head in respect, and Margaret nodded once before turning back toward the house. It was a quiet acknowledgement of change, of acceptance that would allow the household to heal. In the days that followed, Eleanor and Samuel began to dream together more openly. They spoke of moving to a small town where Samuel could work freely, where Eleanor could be by his side without fear or restriction. They made plans, careful but filled with hope, each conversation a promise to protect the love that had grown in adversity. The other workers and enslaved people watched their story unfold with quiet joy. Some whispered about the courage it took to follow one's heart in a world where freedom was limited and love was often forbidden. Others smiled knowingly, understanding the power of loyalty, bravery, and quiet rebellion. Eleanor's transformation was evident to all. She moved with a calm confidence, her eyes shining with purpose and her smile carrying a gentle defiance. Samuel's presence beside her gave him a quiet dignity, one that made even the older men on the plantation nod in respect. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the fields in long golden shadows, Eleanor and Samuel walked together along the edge of the plantation. Samuel stopped and took Eleanor's hands in his once more. "No matter what comes," he said, "we will face it together." Eleanor nodded, resting her forehead against his. "Always." For the first time, they could imagine a future without fear, a life not dictated by others' expectations, but by the choices of their own hearts. Willow Creek would remain the place where their love began, but it would no longer be a place that confined them. Instead, it was a memory of courage, of quiet rebellion, and of love strong enough to endure the weight of the world. As autumn deepened, the leaves turning gold and crimson, Eleanor and Samuel's hearts were free to grow, their love no longer hidden, their future filled with possibility. And in the silent strength of the fields and the whispering wind through the trees, it seemed that even the plantation itself had softened, blessing the union it had once sought to control. The storm had passed, but the love that had caused it now stood firm, unshakable, and ready to face whatever the world might bring. Winter approached Willow Creek, and with it came a quiet peace. The air was crisp, the cotton fields bare, and the house filled with a gentle rhythm of everyday life. But for Eleanor and Samuel, the world felt entirely new. Their love, once hidden in shadows and whispered in secret corners, now breathed freely between them. Margaret had accepted the choice her sister had made. Though she would always wish for safety and ease for Eleanor, she understood that true happiness could not be forced. Charles Whitmore had moved on, his presence no longer a shadow over their lives, leaving Eleanor and Samuel free to build a future together. Eleanor and Samuel spent their days planning, dreaming, and walking together in the crisp winter air. Every glance, every touch, every quiet laugh was a promise, a commitment to the life they had chosen for themselves. As the sun set over the fields, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink, Eleanor rested her hand on Samuel's arm. "We made it," she whispered. "We did," he replied, squeezing her hand gently. "And we will continue to make it, together." The plantation that had once held them in fear now held only memories. Their love had grown stronger than any rule, any expectation, any chain. And in that love, they found freedom, courage, and a future all their own.